Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. One of the biggest storylines in college football heading into 2024, this Oklahoma Sooners team making their debut in the SEC. And Dill, this has been a program that over the last 4 months, my kind of view of this program has changed drastically over the last couple of weeks and months. And I think you go back to early January, you talk about this Oklahoma team heading into the SEC. I thought they checked a lot of boxes, but one of the boxes they certainly did not check was the offensive line. Over the last couple of months, you have to give Brent Venables and this coaching staff a ton of credit in terms of what they've been able to do in the transfer portal to really go into 2024 being pretty confident about what this Oklahoma offensive line will be in the SEC. And you start taking a look at this team and say, they could be awfully dangerous year one in this conference. Want to take a look at some things to really be confident about for this Oklahoma program. Then take a look at the schedule. And there's no easy schedule in the SEC, but there are aspects of the schedule that I do think favor Oklahoma heading into 2024. Fired up to get into this one. Before we do it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the Oklahoma fans. I mean, it's been a blast talking this program on the recruiting trail, in the transfer portal. The Oklahoma fans continue to show a ton of love, a ton of support to the fellas. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section on some of the reasons why you're optimistic about Oklahoma. And Dill, let's start with the offensive line, because we've kind of said repeatedly that this team checks a lot of boxes. We were concerned about Oklahoma going into the SEC with maybe some question marks on the offensive line over the last couple of months. A lot of those question marks have probably been mitigated.
Yeah, I think, frankly, it's a combination of them doing a good job developing guys like Jake Taylor, like Josh Bates. I mean, Jake Taylor, you knew he had some promise coming out of high school, but wasn't necessarily thought to be a factor in this year. But watching that spring game, I think you have a very capable starter at the SEC level on that right side of the line of scrimmage with Jake Taylor, Josh Bates being able to provide some depth. So I think the way they've developed guys through that program, added some experience transfers at those spots. You have a couple of tackles in Spencer Brown and Michael Tarquin who are probably going to battle it out for one of those other spots. I think you just have a more competitive room. You have a little bit more depth. So again, I think between the transfer portal and how they've developed a couple of their younger guys, I think you feel fine about what they're going to be.
And I like how you went to the guys that were already on this roster. You look at Oklahoma in 2023, they lost a ton of experience on the offensive line. And that's really, where the question mark started, right? You got a young quarterback in Jackson Arnold, who you guys know the boys believe in, but going into the SEC with a question mark at the offensive line, that kind of summed up why we had question marks about this Oklahoma team. You kind of read the spring practice notes, you watch the spring game. I mean, Jake Taylor was probably the star of the show, but I think you nailed it. Like, guy like Josh Bates looks like he can give Oklahoma, whether it's a starting role, whether it's a depth piece, you feel pretty good about some of the guys that you have coming back. Jacob Sexton, I throw in that as well. And then you look at what they did in the portal. You don't see Hickman on this list, but Hickman coming over from SMU, one of the better centers in the country, probably giving you some flexibility in terms of how you want to use Troy Everett when he gets back healthy, where, all right, Hickman, a starting center that you have a lot of trust in, you can kick Troy Everett to that guard spot. You look at what they've done in the portal and kind of how this Oklahoma offensive line is made up. You say, all right, we have some young talent that we really like. Jacob Sexton, Jake Taylor. I'd even go and say Eugene Brooks is a true freshman. That's probably a guy that's capable of playing in the SEC year one. That is extremely rare to say. But then you also supplement a lot of that young talent with proven commodities, right? Spencer Brown, a 2-year starter in the Big Ten, a guy like Michael Tarquin, who, kind of played his best football in the SEC with the Florida Gators in 2022. I'm just going to ignore what happened at USC. And you say, we got a lot of experience that have starting experience at the Power 5 level. I look at this Oklahoma offensive line and say, I feel pretty good about it. I'm not saying it's going to be the best unit in the SEC, but it's certainly not going to be a liability like we were kind of fearing in early January. The second thing on my list in terms of why I am fired up about Oklahoma in the SEC, quarterback, wide receiver batteries. Like, you look at Jackson Arnold, we've kind of said it a lot. I think a lot of the Oklahoma fans know how we feel. Jackson Arnold elevates the ceiling of what Oklahoma can be on offense, right? Dylan Gabriel really, really solid college football player. There's a reason that he's coming back for a 6-year college football. Jackson Arnold is going to be an NFL guy. He's got an NFL arm, but I think more importantly, you're probably looking at one of the more slept on wide receiver rooms in the country. You look at all these preseason rankings of wide receiver rooms. I rarely see Oklahoma in the top 10. I look at this wide receiver room and say, Dill, I think Jackson Arnold has plenty to work with heading into 2024.
No, and again, we've talked about it. If Jaleel Fruit gets back on track from what he looked like as a sophomore, you have a big-time player there. Angelo Anthony was playing really good ball until he got hurt. So you got him. Deion Burks looks like he's going to be the star in that unit. He looks just so dynamic. In terms of what he can do, line him up all over the field, can get downfield, can make plays with the ball in his hands. Again, very complimentary to what Oklahoma wants to do as an offense in terms of being able to get guys in space and make a lot of plays. So I think he's a really good fit. And then even got some young guys. I mean, Jaquez Petaway, Brennan Thompson, like guys who, again, maybe weren't really a fit with what Dylan Gabriel was doing because he wasn't necessarily a guy who was going to go push the ball 60 yards down the field, but very much a fit for Jackson Arnold. And something I think you want to see is them attacking down the field a little bit more with those big play weapons.
That play, I believe it was the first play of the second half in the bowl game against Arizona, where Brennan Thompson ran that fly route. Jackson Arnold hits him in stride. I think that ball carried 70 yards. That's the type of stuff you didn't get with Dylan Gabriel. Like you just couldn't. I mean, as good as Dylan Gabriel was at working the intermediate parts of the field, you couldn't ask him to attack the deeper third. Now, I think you left out Nick Anderson, a guy that I know a lot of Oklahoma fans are absolutely fired up about. I want to circle back to Deion Burks, where you look at how that Oklahoma offense was constructed last year. It went through Drake Stoops. No shot at Drake Stoops. I think Deion Burks is just a juiced up version. I think you can ask Deion Burks to do a little bit more. You talk about this Oklahoma wide receiver room potentially being slept on. I think Deion Burks is being slept on. I think he's one of the better wide receivers in the country. And you see a lot of those rankings. They say Jackson Arnold, Nick Anderson. You ask me coming out of that spring game, who's going to be the alpha? Who's going to be the guy in that Oklahoma wide receiver room? I probably go Deion Burks, but you look at 4, 5, 6, 7 wide receivers that really can make plays down the field. Now, I couple that with tight end play. That's going to get drastically better. Dill, one of the knocks on Oklahoma last year, just didn't get enough out of tight ends. Didn't have difference makers at that tight end spot. You look going into 2024, Bauer Sharp, a guy that was a former quarterback, just a souped up athlete at that tight end position. Nothing helps a young quarterback better than having good tight end play. I think Oklahoma's tight end play also goes in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think that's like an underrated thing because Stogner was like, you almost feel like he was better than he was at the end of the day, where again, very limited athletically, didn't really make a ton of plays, couldn't really attack the seams particularly well just because he's not moving the way Bauer Sharp moves. I'm kind of with you. I think the way they like to run fast, they like to run play action. If you're going to run play action, you want to be able to hit your tight ends in the middle. I think that's a big, big add because, again, I just didn't think they had that guy who was challenging people in that room.
And I think the next part I want to talk about in terms of why we're believing in Oklahoma, line of scrimmage playing the defensive side of the football, right? They answered the questions in the portal on the offensive line. They did the same thing on the defensive line, obviously highlighted by bringing in Dominic Williams from TCU, probably the most coveted defensive lineman that was available in the portal. You look at a lot of what SEC teams want to do, big physical offensive lines, running the football. I look at Dominic Williams and DeJoun Terry and say, is that one of the better interior defensive line doers that you see in the country, especially when it comes to stopping the run? Obviously, Jermaine Lole is still on this depth chart. Oklahoma fans don't want to see that anymore, off to Texas. I look at the inside of the offensive or defensive line and say Dominic Williams, DeJoun Terry, Grayson Hall, and then you talk about some guys like Jaden Jackson, David Stone, depth on the inside of the defensive line. And Dale, I think the biggest storyline for Oklahoma heading into 2024, what's this pass rush unit going to look like in the 2024 year? Because the ceiling of what this group can be is so gosh darn high.
And that's the big thing, because I don't think they really had that last year. They just didn't have premier addresses. And you like guys like Bothroyd, Ethan Downs, good physical against the run for sure. Same thing with Trace Ford. But you just didn't have guys like PJ Adebawore, R. Mason Thomas playing consistently enough in being able to like generate sacks at that level where you're beating guys clean, you're getting around the edge. You didn't have that element in that game. But again, PJ looked awesome in the spring game. I'm really looking for a big year from him. Our Mason Thomas, kind of same thing, just adding a little bit more athleticism, a little bit more one-on-one pass rush capability that you didn't have. And you'll still have guys who can be super disruptive because you look, Ethan Downs, Trace Ford, they are disruptive pass rushers. They're just not sack machines. I think you have a couple guys who can, rack up those 5+
That
sacks.
was one of the maybe the critiques that you had was that you look at Oklahoma's defensive line last year, they could produce a lot of havoc. Guys like Rondell Bothroyd, Ethan Downs, heavy hands, collapse in pockets. Did they have that guy that in 3rd and 7, you say, all right, pin your ears back, go get after this tackle from an athleticism standpoint and get after the quarterback? You're kind of right. They didn't have that sack master. You look at this team heading into 2024, and I'm not overlooking guys like Ethan Downs, who's a hammer against the run, but we knew PJ Adebawore would take a year to kind of get his feet wet. He was a raw prospect. If he can take that step year 2, our Mason Thomas going into year 3, a healthy R. Mason Thomas is elite coming off the edge. And I'd even offer in Caden Wooler, too, a guy that was an elite pass rusher coming from the MAC, a ton of length to challenge offensive tackles. That is probably the second thing I'm most excited
I also
for.
think they might have a little bit more juice on the inside. You look at some of the younger guys like Grayson Halton and Ashton Sanders. I mean, again, you add them or complement them with DeJoun Terry and Dominic Williams, who probably aren't your premier pass rushers on the inside. Again, can push pockets, can be disruptive for sure. But you got Grayson Halton, Ashton Sanders. I'm watching them in the spring game. I'm like, you have a little bit more of that athleticism, a little bit of that ability to just win clean in the middle, not just be pocket pushers, but be able to produce sacks from that inside. So I think they have a well-rounded interior. They obviously have more horses on the edge. So
you look at the combination, and I'm just kind of from a schematic standpoint, you have these edge rushers that really can beat tackles on the outside shoulder, force quarterbacks to step up. You look at the guys on the inside. All right, quarterbacks are going to try to step up because you got PJ Adebawore, R. Mason Thomas pinning the ears back, attacking outside shoulders. They're stepping up into Dominic Williams and DeJoun Terry. Like guys that are going, there's, I guess you should say they're not going to have the ability to step up because you have guys that are not necessarily going to be winning with a ton of juice off the line of scrimmage. They're going to be dog walking centers and guards right into the backfield. And so I love that combination too. Linebacker room, we're really fired up about. I said second thing I'm most excited for because the first thing I'm most excited for is this safety group with the combination of Zach Alley. We talked about Zach Alley. We did a film breakdown on Zach Alley. What does he bring to Oklahoma? He brings an aggressive style where these safeties are going to be commanding the middle of the field, taking away the middle of the field. Is there a better safety duo for Zach Alley to walk into than a guy like Billy Bowman Jr. and Peyton Bowen, who both have phenomenal instincts, a ton of range? One of the things Oklahoma struggled with the most was teams beating them in the middle of the field because they put a lot on the linebackers. You look at Zach Alley, he wants to take those safeties up, take away to the middle of the field. I think it's a great combination. That's probably the thing I'm number one fired up for this Oklahoma team.
And that's one of the things, because you even look, I mean, Brent Venables, I feel like he kind of made the right type of move where there was something that I don't want to say was totally broken, but their inability to defend the middle of the field was staggering at times. Like you look at that Arizona game, I couldn't believe what I was watching. It just looked too easy. And I think that's good. Like when you're a head coach, sometimes you got to do those things where you go add a different guy. You replace Ted Roof, who I'm not even sure him and Venables were totally working on the same page.
They weren't.
So obviously Venables brings in one of his disciples. I think that's a huge move. I think you have more continuity on the defense. I think you look at the way Zach Alley developed that defense where he was coaching.
Jacksonville State did a phenomenal job.
And when he was coaching there, you just saw him doing some of the things that you look at with Oklahoma. Like, man, I wish they used their safeties a little bit more effectively. You got 3 or 4 of them who you really feel comfortable about. So it's time to do it.
The most talented group in this team, the safety room. And going into year 3, I think you're going to see you saw them take a jump into year 2. If they can make another jump into year 3, this is going to be a plus defense in the SEC. Now, evaluating Oklahoma in the SEC, you got to take a look at the schedule. There's no easy schedule in the SEC. Oklahoma fans know that. We all know that as college football fans. I like the first 3 games where you got not a new quarterback, but a young quarterback in Jackson Arnold. If this Oklahoma team's as good as we think, they should be winning Temple, Houston, Tulane. You get all 3 of those in Norman. You get Tennessee at home. one, it's going to be just such a rowdy environment. Like first SEC game for Oklahoma, that's going to be one of the best environments we see on Saturday.
The line's
September
going to have to strap it up that game though, because
100%.
Tennessee,
I think
people
that's
good
kind of what
back.
I'm getting at. Is you look at Oklahoma, this is how you're going to get a sense of can this Oklahoma team be dangerous in the SEC? If you can block up Tennessee and what they have, that's going to be a massive question. And if you can win that game against Tennessee, a team that you're very high on heading into 2024, I think you go on the road to Auburn, you probably take care of business. And what I'm kind of getting at here is then you're off on October 5th, and then you get Texas, right? So you're getting a bye week before Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Maine, Missouri. Then you get another bye week, and you get Alabama at home. So maybe arguably the two biggest games of Oklahoma's season in 2024 come. I mean, I guess Texas isn't at home, but Alabama's at home. But both Texas, Alabama coming off a bye week. If Oklahoma can get hot during those first 5 games, go into the bye week potentially 5-0, hosting Texas in the Red River, like I think Oklahoma can get off to the races, but I think those first 4 games, specifically Tennessee at home, Auburn on the road, if we can kind of see this Oklahoma team put it together, the back half of the season, like there's going to be a lot of fun games on the road at Missouri. You go on the road to Death Valley in Tiger Stadium. I think the schedule's gettable for Oklahoma, but it's going to be a really fun season for this Oklahoma team.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with you. I think we'll know a lot after that Tennessee game. I think, again, I don't think appreciate how good Tennessee is. So if they even if that's a really tight game, if that's a good game, you see them going, that means they can play with anyone. Because I think Tennessee, especially if Nico plays well for them, they're true sophomore quarterback. I mean, they're going to be a really, really good team. The defense, I think, is going to be far better than people kind of expect. So that'll be an interesting game. I think Oklahoma fans will know pretty quickly how well this season might be or how competitive they're going to be. If they play good against Tennessee, I'll feel good.
Yeah, fire me up for that one. 2 of my favorite quarterbacks in that 2023 class, Jackson Arnold, Nico, playing on a massive stage.
That might be being slept on a little bit. I know everyone likes to talk about Alabama, Ole Miss. It's like, if things work out for those 2 young quarterbacks, those 2 teams, you put them right in the heart of it as 100%. Okay, Ole Miss, Alabama, LSU, those teams aren't that much more talented if those 2 quarterbacks are going.
And you can't really say it in early May because you haven't seen both of those quarterbacks play a ton of football. There is definitely a possibility that you get to mid-October and you're talking about Nico and Jackson Arnold being some of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. That is not a crazy thing to say. You probably can't say it early May just because you haven't seen enough of them yet. That being said, it's very much a possibility. This Oklahoma team, extremely dangerous. I don't think enough people are giving them credit. Very excited for this program. Would love to hear from you guys in the comments section. Of course, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.